Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the breakfast session, teaching and learning breakfast session, hosted by UniSA and the AAUT. And thank you for coming this hour of the day. It's great to see you all. So we've had a bit of a winter break. So you all presumably have come back from Tuscany or the south of France or wherever you have happened to be, and now you're back at work. So it's great to see you all back. Today, we have a small team from the University of New England. We have Associate Professor Ingrid Harrington. We have Dr. Christy O'Neill. We have Dr. Kat Volpe-Johnston and Associate Professor Rachel Adlington. They were the 2024 recipient of the 2024 Citation for Outstanding Contributions to Student Learning. And you're all about to find out why. They're going to talk about using universal design for learning principles and evidence-based strategies to build academic capacities to enhance initial teacher education, student engagement, and retention in online learning. So, yeah, I think there's a fair bit to get through there. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this session from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that's the people of the Adelaide Plains. And we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. Also acknowledge the Kaurna people as traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands that you are joining us from today, and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to distinguished guest from the University of New England. Thank you very much for being there. We're very thrilled to host you and we're looking forward to your presentation. So over to you. Thanks.
Great. Many thanks, Stuart, and welcome or good morning, everybody. My name's Associate Professor Ingrid Harrington and very proud to lead this team on a very significant project that is designed to recognise the difficulties and challenges that our students in tertiary education face, especially those in the first year. So thanks you, Stuart, and University of South Australia and also AAUT. It really is a pleasure to be here. Stuart has already acknowledged country, but I'd like to acknowledge the Kamilaroi land that I'm currently speaking from, and Armidale is on the land of the Anawan people, and we pay respects to their elders past and present. So back in 2019, a report came out and UNE basically got the wooden spoon as far as retention. Out of 41 universities in Australia, UNE was rated the poorest at retaining students at the first year level, creating a sense of belonging, and just overall student engagement. So we had a big problem. And so looking at the literature that is, there's a lot of literature on what strategies are best utilised by those students in first year. I did a macro study and distilled the most popular strategies into what we called 15 basic elements, which we'll go into a bit later. But it was the actual program was also informed by a lot of government reports. And initially it was designed just for first year units, but it became a bit of a roaring success. And so it's now been extended across every unit in the University of New England. So our demographics are, oh, sorry, Kat, this is you.
Thanks, Ingrid.
Sorry.
That's okay. So to fully understand why we developed this project, Ingrid has spoken a bit about this already, but it's important to look at who our students are. So our initial teacher education cohort comprised of 5,100 students. And what's distinctive, though, is that over 96% of them study off campus through online delivery, where most students are not physically on campus and need to rely heavily on digital learning environments and remote support. The majority of our students are not straight out of school. Over 82% are 25 years and older, and 35% of them are considered mature age. Many of them are juggling multiple responsibilities, and a significant portion of them are from rural, remote, or regional areas, about 78%, and nearly 44% are first in family to attend university. We also see considerable diversity in life circumstances. More than 1 in 5 students come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and around 70% are enrolled in undergraduate degrees. The gender balance is also skewed, with 82% being female, many of whom have family and caregiving responsibilities alongside their studies. These demographics highlight a clear need for flexibility in course delivery, assessment, and support. Students are balancing study with work, parenting, and other commitments, which meant that we needed to design our approach around their circumstances, rather than expecting them to fit into the mold of a conventional university experience. So the Commencing Student Success Project, or CSSP, was founded on the principle that we as academics need to practice what we preach. In initial teacher education, our students are expected to closely align with the Australian professional standards for teachers. And a core professional standard for graduate teachers is to know your students and how they learn, meaning that they need to recognize and respond to the diverse backgrounds and learning needs of their students. For us, that meant turning the mirror on ourselves. If we expect our students to adopt this mindset in their teaching, then we need to adopt it in our own practice as university educators. This philosophy became the foundation of CSSP and influenced how we designed and delivered support to our commencing students. The proven success of this approach didn't just stay within the School of Education, it became the catalyst for a broader initiative eventually across the University of New England, which we call Project Uplift. And Project Uplift was designed to work across the whole university with the same goal as CSSP of enhancing student engagement, success, and retention. The literature makes it clear. Attending university can be a stressful experience, particularly for students who may already be juggling multiple life commitments. Studies have shown that around 85% of university students report elevated distress levels, and almost 1 in 5 experience distress that's classified as high. These figures are more than just statistics. They highlight the urgent need for strategies that support student well-being alongside academic achievement. One key finding in the research is the importance of encouraging a positive sense of belonging. When students feel they are a part of a learning community, that they are seen, heard, and valued, they are more likely to engage meaningfully with their studies. Belonging creates what's often referred to as a safe learning environment, where students feel where they feel free to ask questions, seek assistance, and contribute to discussions without fear of judgment. We also know that adult learners face unique barriers, from time pressures and financial constraints to competing work and family responsibilities. Yet while these challenges are well documented, there's been comparatively little focus on addressing them from an organizational or institutional level, and too often the responsibility falls solely on the individual student. Research also tells us that a student's sense of belonging is directly linked to their persistence and ability to stay motivated in their studies. When this sense of belonging is strong, students are far more likely to continue. When it's absent, the risk of attrition grows. And this insight from the literature strongly informed how we designed our approach in the CSSP. For many non-traditional students, the initial journey into university is one of the most challenging stages of their academic journey. This is the point where students are learning how to navigate academic expectations, new technologies, and the competing demands from work and family life all at once. The concept of transition pedagogy offers a valuable framework for addressing these challenges. It calls for a whole-of-institution approach that ensures engagement strategies are not left to individual units or academics on their own, but are coordinated and integrated across university. This means creating proactive interventions that provide just-in-time support so students can access help exactly when they need it, rather than after they've already disengaged. It also means prioritizing that critical sense of belonging from the very beginning. for example, in first-year units. In the online learning space, in-unit support plays a particularly significant role. The presence and accessibility of online educators can make a profound difference in how connected students feel to their studies. Research shows that the quality of teacher-student connection strongly influences student engagement and satisfaction in both first and second year. In other words, that human element, feeling seen and supported by a real person, remains at the heart of effective online education. It's not just about delivering the content, it's about building trust, responsiveness, and a sense that someone is invested in each student's success from the very beginning. At the heart of the CSSP was a commitment to combine evidence-based research with a genuine responsiveness to what our students tell us they need. We drew on findings highlighting the value of listening closely to the student voice when designing teaching and support strategies. Further, student evaluations of teaching were more than just a compliance exercise. They can be a rich source of insight. It has been evidenced that student evaluations can be taken seriously and should be, as they can directly inform effective teaching strategies that improve student learning outcomes. This is important, especially for first-year students whose preferences and needs often differ from those in later stages of study. Other Australian studies have explored the factors that shape student perceptions of learning and teaching. Their findings reinforce that students value approaches that are interactive, clear, and there's a sense of connection, and that these preferences strongly influence their engagement and satisfaction. For the CSSP, this meant that we didn't simply apply generic best practices. Instead, we tailored our approach by combining the evidence from national and international research with direct feedback from our students. This ensured that our strategies were both academically sound and truly relevant to the learners we serve at the University of New England.
Thanks, Kat. Just building on what you were talking about regarding the sources of information that the program was based on, it was important that we needed to listen to people who had gone out and researched a lot of government departments, and so we had the latest data available to inform what we needed to do to go forward. So the program was based on the recommendations of the Graduate Outcomes Survey that was put out by the Australian Department of Education, Skills and Employment, the Higher Education Standards Framework, which is a TEXA document, the review of Australian higher education that ended up being like the Grattan Report, the best practices for enhancing retention and success that was put out by Australian Education International, and the ACER report on improving the retention and success of Indigenous students. So there was many national reports that we drew the recommendations from to underpin the conceptual framework of the project. Speaking of conceptual framework, we based the project on Knowle's adult theory of self-directed learning, and we did this because we're really at the tertiary level, we're dealing with adults, and SDL is integral to adult education. And what the theory does, it allows learners to have control over time, space, and place of their learning, and this is key to the tertiary learning environment. So Knowle believed that being self-directed is central to an adult self-concept, working life and personal development. So when we were designing the project, it was vital for certainly unit coordinators to take this factor into consideration when they are coordinating a unit comprising adult learners, and needing to fully understand that they needed that control, to have that control over their time, space, and place. So many of you have heard of the Universal Design for Learning principles, which ultimately promotes access. So in short, it is an education framework based on learning theory that includes cognitive neuroscience and guides the development of flexible learning environments and spaces for those that experience difficulties. So it is basically making sure that that access to learning is equitable and everybody can access it. So, and the three domains were making sure that engagement was accessible, representation was accessible, and action and expression. A little bit more on this. I mean, every university would like to think that when they are putting together awards or units, that they cater for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But what we found, if we really took 5 steps back and were quite objective about it, what we found was that we were catering for diversity and inclusion, but still students didn't feel like they belonged, and we weren't being very equitable. We had this one size fits all, and I remember a moment at the school meeting, and we have a very large school. Then it was potentially 70 academics, and most of them taught at multiple year levels. And I asked academics to consider, just say, the first year unit or second year unit that they study, that they teach, and a third and or fourth year unit. And I asked them to consider how does their teaching practices and their views and expectations of students change from maybe a first year student to a fourth year student. And many of them, actually all of them, looked a bit strange and dumbfounded and said, well, no, it stays the same. Our units are the same. We use the same language and all that sort of stuff. So then I indicated, so you're basically saying, because we're training teachers to teach effectively, that you've got a teacher or a student in first year, but you're holding them accountable and grading them according to a grade 6 expectation and level. And that sort of shut the room down a bit, because we know it's the AQF is very clear in its statements of first year learners have limited capacity to and they have a certain way of learning compared to fourth years. As such, we need to tailor language, unit coordinator expectations to suit. And so this was a really important slide to indicate that whilst in our hearts we really wanted to do all 4, in reality we weren't. So what are these basic elements? So I did say that there started off to be 14, 15. We ended up narrowing it down to 10. So this is all based on what the literature says. So on what strategies we know first year students resonate particularly with. So videos by the unit coordinator. It's about talking to a person and breaking down the myths that they may have in that, oh my goodness, you've got a PhD, I can't possibly look at you. You know, these all sorts of misconceptions that a student may have about an academic. But the videos introduce the unit and the topics. Flexible assessment submission portal is harking back to what the conceptual framework, where we're looking at creating space and flexibility for our learners. So whilst there is a due date, depending on where in the trimester, students can opt for a 1, 2, or 3 week flexible learning portal to submit their assessment task. Bearing in mind they probably have some children, maybe work a couple of jobs, they're studying full-time, and they also have to go out on prac. So there is no questions asked, they nominate, and Christy will demonstrate that in a minute. Video explanation of assessments. basically, we all have an A4 page of this is what I want from the assignment, but to actually have a unit coordinator explain the do's and don'ts of, what are the expectations of assessments has been very successful. And our MyLearn figures show that students listen to the same video explanation of assessments at least 3 times. So they do listen to that. Providing exemplars, again, students, it's this facilitative approach of really being clear, of telling a student, this is exactly what I'm expecting from you. Assessment levels and requirements pitched at student level, that's all goes back to AQF, even looking at the verbs and the adjectives that we use to describe what we want them to do in an assessment task. Collective feedback to all students is a nice way of saying, after an assessment task has been marked, thanks, you did a great job, all of you. Really like the way you've done this, this, and this. For the next assessment task, please be mindful of this, this, and this. And that's all. So it's a message to everybody. The UC was present and approachable within the unit. So they were actually responsive, very responsive. And where possible, they would engage with the student across Zoom. The LMS platform became consistent. So a way that academics understand their academic identity is reflected in how they present units, their own units. And back in the days, they were able to do whatever they wanted. So for a student studying 4 units, what would happen is that they would see the assessment class, they would be able to find their assessment task pretty easy on the first unit, but they couldn't find it in the second. Everything was all over the place. Now everything is, like assessments and other important information, is in exactly the same spot across all units. Students really appreciated understanding why am I learning this and why is it important for what I'm doing. And clearly defined assessment rubrics. Having more meaningful structure as opposed to something that was very superficial was important. So all of these elements were underpinned in every unit. So what we found from student evaluation, we asked students, which of these basic elements can you absolutely not live without? And they screamed at us loud and consistently over 7 trimesters. By far, the top 5, and you can see that number 1 is the flexibility of assessment portal, because we all know it, we all want a piece of a student in weeks 4 and usually in weeks 8 or 9. And that's 4 of us. So to have that flexibility is great. And you'll see that they are all the same particular elements. And so even if you take 1 or 2 of these away and embed them in your units, your students will love you. So just to recap that, we have seen what students want. Out of 10, they definitely want these 5. And what they're trying to say to us is they want clear, well-defined expectations, learning objectives, guidelines, and assessment criteria. So, but to be more facilitative rather than gatekeeping as, oh no, you didn't use that format, so you failed type thing. And the video explanations really provides that face to the name, that humanistic side that, yeah, we are all people, that students really loved. What we did to assist staff, because we had a very large school, is I put together a MyLearn site, and every single basic element had its rationale, the origins from the literature and the reports where they came from, exemplars, and an example of how it was embedded in a unit. So they could actually go and visit that at any time. We also had IT, the university IT on board. So if you wanted to professionally do your videos, you could go there, no problems. And Christie's units are one of the top in the School of Education. And I think she's going to treat you all now to a bit of a walkthrough into one of her units.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. So now that we've heard a little bit about the basic elements in summary, I thought I'd show you what many of them look like in practice using one of my own MyLearn sites or Moodle sites as an exemplar. So I'm going to show you EDPE 247, which is Teaching Physical Education in Primary Schools. So this is one of the compulsory curriculum units that the primary education students need to do as part of their course. So I am going to stop screen sharing this PowerPoint for a moment, and I'm just going to jump over to the web browser to show you what we'll be looking at. So hopefully everyone can now see a Moodle or a MyLearn site. Please speak up if you can't. But effectively, this is a little bit what a landing page looks like from student view as soon as they log into any of our School of Education units. So as Kat mentioned at the beginning, the vast majority of our students are studying wholly online. So we really need to put in that attention to detail to how we're structuring our MyLearn sites, given the students will be learning asynchronously a lot of the time and need to work quite independently through things. So you can see here that we've got the welcome videos straight away. Students can see a staff member. They can see that someone's at home, that there's a face to a name, and they're not alone in this online world with lots and lots of text that they've got to read through by themselves. I will show you an exemplar of a video in a moment, but I wanted to walk through other parts of the site first. So scrolling down, we can see that there's very clear tiles here so that students straight away have that signposting to know where are my Zoom drop-in sessions, where are my assessments, where are some other useful resources. They've got clearly labelled modules that clearly align with the schedule of learning so that they can pop straight in there if they think, okay, today I need to focus on module 2, I'm going to go and do that. So I'm going to jump over to the assessments tile because that's where a lot of the basic elements do sit. So as soon as students come in, they've got this banner and this message about the flexible portal system that Ingrid was discussing. So different unit coordinators can choose to give students either a 7, a 14 or a 21-day flexible portal. Many people usually like to do 7 or 14. That's what I personally like to do. And it's very easy for students to log in. They simply need to click on this link here if they want to adjust their due dates. I won't click on that one at the moment just because it's got some student names in there for privacy reasons, but effectively it's very easy for students to choose whether they want a flexible portal for one assessment or they might choose it for all. When this first came out, it was a little bit novel, and I think students liked having that flexibility. But now for those, especially that might be doing 4 units, going on a placement, they're starting to be a little bit more savvy. They might use a 14-day flexible portal for one assessment, a 7-day for another, and then not use the portal at all for the third assessment. We still work within, I guess, policy guidelines at UNE around extensions. So if students need additional time after this, they do need to go through the formal Ask UNE process and have the evidence to apply for extensions in the same way that many other universities operate things. So I also point students in the direction of screencasts. So other academics will call them different things. It might be called a video explanation of an assessment, where it's basically where we walk and talk students through the outline, the rubric, or any other resources they need, knowing that they are learning independently and asynchronously much of the time. So I won't play this video for you, but you can just see here when I flipped over to the Echo Video Library where these assessment screencasts sit. I make videos approximately 20 minutes in length that gives students really detailed talk through what the expectations of the task are, unpacking different elements of the rubric. And then so when they do come back into this assessment block, everything they need for individual assessments is very clearly marked with clear headings. There's specific folders, there's banners. So we've got the usual things in the banners, such as the word count or the weighting of the task, but also clearly the preferred or the on-time due date or the flexible portal closure. So what many of us do to ensure that the assessment is still constructively aligned with the learning and that we're within policy requirements and that we're not having lots of late assessments when we need to be wrapping up marks at the end of trimester is we list the closure of the flexible portal as the date that pre-flexible portal we might have always considered to be the actual due date, and then we instead open the portals maybe 2 weeks earlier and call them the preferred or the on-time due dates. So within that, students are getting the psychological and the emotional benefit of having an extension. They're really getting signposted. This is the period of time when you should be focusing on this task and these modules that go with this task. And we've got some previous student comments about the assessment as little pullouts from the post-assessment feedback to really highlight in student language, this is what other students previously have found useful in terms of the types of skills or knowledge that you might develop from this task. So here we've got a folder with all the resources you need for the assessment, so the outlines, the rubrics, a pre-stocked frequently asked questions forum, which supplements those video screencasts of the assessment. So students watch the screencast, they come back, many of their questions will already be pre-answered in here. If they're not, they're free to add more questions. The usual Turnitin Dropbox, and then the post-assignment feedback, which we've found is very valuable for students to give us feedback on assessments of what worked well for them, what we could improve on, whilst that is quite fresh in their mind. And we find a lot of this feedback is actually a lot more rich compared to if you're waiting the traditional 10 weeks for the end of trimester evaluations, which we still do at UNE. But like other institutions, the response rate has really dropped off in recent years. So at least as educators, we are still getting feedback on our practice live throughout the trimester. And then we read through this, we give students announcements in terms of overall feedback. You know, this was the mean mark for the cohort, what worked well, you all did this really well across the board, but even better if for the next assessment, keep certain things in mind. So to give you an idea of what one of these assessment outlines would look like, everything they need is in here. We've encouraged everyone to have a very clear and similar first page of the assessment at least, where there's a nice clear table with a summary of the key information there. And then obviously as we go through, staff still put their own description and detail about whatever that task requires. But we have, as part of CSSP, particularly encouraged staff to provide at least partial exemplars of what is expected for the assessment. Obviously, for privacy reasons and not wanting to spoon feed everything to students, we typically don't provide full exemplars, but certainly snippets of exemplars across different parts of the assignment can give students an indication that they are on the right track, or perhaps I'm really off track and I need to adjust. So here, to make sure that there's no misunderstanding about what supplementary documents and what practical activities from the module learning students need to use from the task, I've got a screenshot there of exactly the types of activities they need to engage with. And then I've given a little model here, very similar to a prior student assessment, to show that yes, even though the word count is quite short for this task, you can actually answer these 3 key questions quite concisely in quite a targeted way. Here is how you might go about it. Similarly, I've got further screenshots of supplementary documents. And then here I've just put a little exemplar of, this is one example of how you may like to lay out this assessment task. This is an indication of roughly how much detail you need to be giving for each skill, because they need to get through 12 fundamental movement skills in this portfolio. And then right at the very end, we have that very clear marking rubric. The students can see the 3 key areas that they'll be getting marked against, and then obviously the different criteria across the different grade bands, depending on where they're aiming to achieve. So heading back here now, I thought we'd wrap up the website walkthrough with showing you an example of one of the welcome videos I do in individual modules. So we encourage staff to not just have that one welcome video on the introductions forum, but consistently have themselves throughout the site. So it looks like someone's home so that students feel like they're still getting taught by an academic and they're not just self-teaching at home through text. So I have tried to optimize the sound for this and my sound's up, but I do apologize. Videos don't always come across perfectly on Zoom, so you may need to increase your own volume.
Hi everyone, welcome to EDPE 247 Module 1 Theory. Today I'm down at the Sport UNE Hockey Centre. Every module you're going to see me pop up somewhere different around the UNE campus or Armidale so that you can see the wider context in which the university is situated. In this module, our focus is looking at an introduction to the 2024 K-6 PDHPE curriculum and teaching physical education in primary schools. So in the first part of the lecture, it will focus on housekeeping and general structure of the unit. So we'll talk about the key assessment items and key learning outcomes that you'll be focusing on this trimester. I'll introduce you to the concept of a Zoom drop-in session, and I'll also point you in the direction of some key resources that you'll need to look at quite closely throughout this trimester. Then in part 2, we'll start to get into our content. So looking at a broader overview and structure, including key terminology of that 2024 K-6 PDHPE syllabus and how it compares to the Australian Health and Physical Education curriculum. Then in part 3, we'll wrap up by considering why physical education in primary schools is so important, particularly when we also look at it in light of other concepts such as physical literacy and the fundamental movement skills, which will be a really big focus across the first 3 practical modules. We'll consider how these things lead into student success in both lifelong physical activity and accessing the full K-10 health and physical education curriculum. That's all from me for now, but I will see you back over in Module 1.
So you can see there just a little snapshot. I guess I'm visually and audio explaining exactly what students need to do in this module. It's a bit of an introduction to the lectures and it supplements the other text that we still put at the start of each module where we're clearly signposting this is what this module is about and this is what you can expect to learn. So I'll stop sharing that now and jump back over to the main PowerPoint slides. Oops. So now that we've seen that exemplar, the reason why we do those welcome videos, as was mentioned earlier, is to really build that social presence of the unit coordinator or the lecturer on the teaching site so that students really can break down that myth that academics are unapproachable, because through the videos, if they're seeing our body language, our tone of voice, they can see that we are approachable people. And then if they do need to ask that assessment question later on, or they have other life things going on and they're going to have to ask for an extension, they feel as though that we're people they can connect with, they feel less isolated, and it increases that sense of belonging. So for me personally, I really enjoy getting outdoors and being creative and showing students around UNE and Armidale more broadly, given that many of them will actually never spend any time on campus throughout the duration of their degree. Other academics make their videos in ways that best suit their needs and their personality. So some academics might choose to make use of the professional services that we've got on campus. Others will make them over Zoom in their office. It doesn't really matter how these module welcome videos are made, as long as that social presence of the academic is really built into the site to really start to build that effective or emotional engagement with the students, which can then have the positive benefits cognitively for how deeply they're able to engage with their learning. So in terms of student feedback on this process, we've had a lot of positive feedback. Students are feeling like they're not floating around in internet land by themselves. They felt like it was almost like learning on campus with the unit coordinator or the lecturer directly there. And they felt it was a lot easier to process information that was coming from a video and a person rather than if they're just reading text all the time, which has been, I think, the tradition in online learning to give students lots of text to read. student voice played a really big part, and we built that agency within the MyLearn site by giving them opportunities to provide that post-assessment feedback. This is all anonymous, so they can voice in terms of what they felt happy with, what we could do better. And so this then gives students that timely opportunity to express themselves. And on the right-hand side, there is some real examples of quotes I've gotten on that fundamental movement skills portfolio. For me, it's really reassuring as an educator to know I'm actually giving them tasks that they feel prepare them for the classroom, that encourage deep reflection, because that's exactly what I was aiming for. But likewise, it encourages my continual improvement and reflective practice as an educator by knowing that students are finding that 1,000 word limit really tricky, because obviously I've got to balance the student feedback with obviously policy and accreditation requirements around word limits as well. So I have adopted that feedback as best I can. The assessment's different to what it was 2 years ago, but I know I still have ongoing work to do in this space. And so it is helpful to close the loop and feedback to students, thanks for letting me know this. This is what worked really well with your task as a cohort. This is what we would have liked to have seen more from this particular cohort, or skills that we feel are still developing. And the third domain we really want to tap into with these CSSP basic elements was cognitive load. So that consistency of design across the units was essential to increase the predictability, to reduce the cognitive load of students, but also make the most of their study time if they are managing those multiple role expectations, working full time, have 3 children, managing 3 or 4 units at once. If they can only study maybe for 2 hours on a Wednesday evening, and then they've got another hour spare in between children's sport on a Saturday, you don't want to be spending half an hour of that 1 hour study time slot looking for the basic things like, where do I find my assessment template? How do I get started? At least with this consistent design, students can jump straight into their learning, and those flexible portals are really about increasing their agency, recognizing them as adult learners and not treating them like children where they constantly need to ask for permission to have, even a 24-hour extension because maybe their child was sick overnight and they didn't get in their assessment before the midnight deadline. So the flexible portal was overwhelmingly positive from a student perspective in managing that work-life balance, taking the pressure off, not just for those students managing the multiple role expectations, but particularly many of our students being first in family. They haven't had anyone necessarily model to them before what a university study schedule looks like. How many hours a week am I meant to commit if I'm juggling multiple units? So it really helps the students to adjust to those new deadlines. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Rachel.
So I'd just like to share some of the data on the impact of the Commencing Student Success Project and all of the basic elements that have come to bear on this impact. So, whoops, if you could, sorry, Christy. To date, the basic elements have been embedded across 155 School of Education units of all levels, including undergraduate and graduate entry, initial teacher education courses, and postgraduate non-initial teacher education courses. And these basic elements are the ones that have been rolled out across the university, as Ingrid said in the at the beginning. But focusing on the School of Education, our business intelligence data demonstrates substantial improvement in successful School of Ed unit completions, and a decrease, of course, corresponding decrease in unsuccessful non-completions. And this is why the CSSP moved beyond commencing units in the School of Education, ultimately, and across the university. Thanks, Christy. So just to give you a couple of little case studies, we have 2 examples of units that show significant increases in pass rates, which is a rough and ready corollary to engagement, and decreases in withdrawals corresponding with attrition. So this first unit, Unit 1, is an early childhood unit, and over the course of the 4 years, from pre-inclusion of the elements to post-inclusion of the elements, the unit incrementally reduced its withdrawal rate from 11% down to just over 1%, and also increased its pass rate from 81% to 91% of those students who continued to the end of the unit. Case study 2 was a science unit, primary science unit, and this also incrementally reduced its withdrawal rate from just under 12% to just over 4% and increased its pass rate from 85 up to 90, nearly 92% of students. So we're quite pleased with the way that these units have actually improved in these ways over time. And so I'll hand over to Ingrid for final thoughts on the project and the implications of how we do learning and teaching at UNE and how you might do it in your institutions.
Thanks, Rachel. So I know there's a lot going on in the project, and to try and succinctly reflect all the bits and pieces of it in an hour is ambitious at best. But we hope that you will be able to get some idea of the just the motivations of the project. And I think it's also based very much on the premise when I wrote the program was, if we don't change anything, then nothing will change. We know that we're not doing things well. And so to continue to do the same things that results in us not doing things well is not going to change anything. So whilst the elements are very well embedded in the literature, we don't, and we haven't seen them front and centre in the tertiary setting. And so that's why the flexible portal, and there are a couple of other things on the chat, the video recordings, and academic integrity, all that sort of stuff. We've had to try something different to see if it works, because we certainly know what hasn't been working. So here is, this is the tiles of the actual site, and all staff are able to click onto that and have a look for more exemplars and explanations and things like that. So it's really about being flexible. I think flexibility is the one word I would describe that the CSSP brings into our tertiary learning space. And students, as a result of taking some ownership and some power over, as Christy mentioned, juggling 3 units, 4 units, and with the amount of flexible portal times, not all students opt for them. You would think maybe, oh, everyone's going to opt for them. They don't. There are some who don't opt for them at all. And we've found that if we offer a 3-week flexible portal, most students get their assessments in the second week, but it's just, that just in case life gets in the way. So they've really, really appreciated that. And we've also, our professional staff have come on board and they collaborate with us, with the academics at the whole school levels, and they help pre-populate the MyLearn shells as they're rolled over into each trimester. The project has done exceptionally well from the school level, faculty level, university level, at the regional level, my leadership and the actual project itself, and of course, ultimately the AAUT citation. So it really goes to show that if you want things to change, if you want to change the status quo, what needs to happen is changing exactly what you're doing. And it might sound radical, it might really be taking a risk, but if you don't change your current practice, nothing will change. And we have seen the success of this project. And here's a whole list of references. I'm just mindful of time and any questions. And I'm slowly working through the chat, but maybe we could just do this now.
Okay, thank you very much, team. That was amazing. Thank you very much. Big round of applause from everybody, in however you want to express that online. I love the practical advice that you gave, and obviously the audience really responded to that. So thank you so much for responding to the questions in the chat. I think there's a couple we might have missed, but we'll get to them. There are some questions in the Q&A window, and I'll just ask, so 3 from Anna. Anna, are you there to ask the question to the team?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much.
Hey,
That
Anna,
was
go ahead.
Whoop. Sorry about that. Yes. Thank you so much. That was a really brilliant presentation, and I'm really interested in adding some of the elements that you've talked about. And yes, unfortunately, I did kind of take over the Q&A chat. But first of all, is how do you address the low engagement with feedback requests from students, despite multiple attempts in highlighting how important it is? So I have a course that has over 500 students in it, but I only get about 2 to 5% response, even whether it's the end of trimester, mid trimester, or when I'm just asking casually at the end of the examination period, after the assessment for some feedback. I have really low feedback responses.
Good question, Anna, and we certainly had the same problem. The in-unit assessments were designed to address our really poor and pathetic end of unit response from students. I think it was 15%. It was ridiculous. So what I trialed, and some people, when you put these sorts of initiatives in place, you're not going to be popular. People need to change, and some don't want to change, and everything's fine and all that sort of stuff. So one of the changes, one thing I tried was I made it a hurdle help. So what that meant was that at the end of the first assessment task, you weren't able to access the second assessment task until you filled out this, like a Survey Monkey, very, very basic 5 Likert scale questions. And once you've done that, it would take you 2 minutes, if that. But it was able to, and the questions, of course, were very, very important, which ones you chose. But at the end of the day, we got 98% of students' response. Wow. Compared to, 3 or 4. And this was at the end of each assessment task. And of course, the last one you can't do anything about, but people were so used to providing feedback that they ended up giving feedback. And that was absolutely fantastic.
That's amazing. I'll definitely have a think whether or not I can add that in. My second question is about the actual flexible assessment submission portal and UNE policies. So I'm from the University of Southern Queensland, and we have a very strict policy in terms of our extensions and submission deadlines. And I was wondering whether this flexible submission portal is actually included within the UNE policy, or is that just something done on top of and more of a guideline?
Good question, and a popular one. So because the university and in the School of Education, we weren't doing very well on that. We were very fortunate to have the support of our head of school, who was also of the mindset that if we don't try something different, then our results aren't going to change. So with the permission of the Dean and the Vice-Chancellor, we were able to work clearly, and Christy alluded to this in her section, where people can still go for the flexible portal, but then if they still need time, then the formal UNE policies will kick in, and you require the documentation and all of that. So that hasn't changed, but we decided to introduce just let's see what happens with this. And so the school was able to operate within a bubble just to see whether or not it was effective. And I'm unsure at the academic board level how far that is gone. but we are still able to operate with that.
Yeah, and just to elaborate, sorry, Anna, on what I said as well in my presentation was that the closure of the flexible portal, many unit coordinators will put as what they used to consider the actual on-time due date before the times we had flexible portals, and then they'll open the assessment due date, say 2 weeks earlier than it previously was. So students have a clear window. So technically the closure of the flexible portal is still sort of the on-time due date. We know as academics within the policy, but students getting that sort of psychological benefit of an extension. And then after that, like Ingrid said, the normal university-wide procedures about formally asking for extensions continue,
Yeah,
like
of
every other
course.
school.
Thank you so much. And it was really good to hear that this was with the permission of the head of school and the dean and stuff like that. Gives me ideas. Now, my final question is also to do with engagement. And have you found an increase in student engagement use of the resources? So, for example, we also provide video guided explanations of the assessments and facts and questions, but I can see that only about 20% of the student cohort utilize those resources. So, with the changes, along with everything else that you've done, have you actually seen an uptake in the use of those resources?
I could speak to that. I think uptake of resources all comes back to assessment design. And if you really want students to access and utilise resources, then revisiting your assessment and making it perhaps multifactored instead of one, 1,000-word essay or 2,000-word essay. How about we have 3 parts of a 2,000-word essay that specifically hones in on the 3 resources that you really need for them to look at. So engagement overall has increased, and everybody has revisited their assessment tasks to make sure that the language that they use in their first, second year units isn't the language that is expected in third and fourth year units. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much again. Brilliant presentation. And that's all from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna. We have time for 1 or 2 more. And thank you so much to the CSSP team for answering those questions in the chat. You always know when you've had a good presentation when the chat is going as well as it is there. So there's a question from Fiona Gentle. Are you there, Fiona? I can't see. A few people.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Fiona. Could you ask your
Hi.
question?
Oh, look, I just was interested to know about how it sort of works from the unit coordinator site and managing the staff regarding markings and deadlines and meeting, does the final assessment bump up against moderation, or are there any sort of pressure points there with this flexible portal, or is it just backwards mapped to function in that way?
I think
I
there's
can see absolutely the benefit of it from a unit coordinator's perspective, and from the student experience perspective, I can really see the benefit of that. But I just was sort of wondering how you work it in the back end, I guess.
I'm happy to take it,
yeah.
Ingrid, if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So thanks, Fiona, for your question. And I guess the backward mapping is part of it, part of the good planning. At UNE, we have a 21-day policy for turning around marking assessments and releasing them. Usually at the preferred or the on-time due date, we still have quite a few students submit at that point in time. So if we're working with, say, a team of casual marking staff, we're still able to have a marking moderation meeting with a range of exemplars within a few days of that portal opening to start that marking process. And actually, it has made meeting the marking deadline processes within that 21-day cycle possibly even easier for staff, because rather than having 110 assessments land in your inbox at once on a Sunday night, and you've got to mark them all in the 21 days, because it's a little bit more staggered in terms of students submitting within that window, and they, I guess, have their own individual 21-day clock. It might mean that you've got to mark a group of 34, and then you might have a block of 25 in the middle, and then you mark the rest. So actually, you're not trying to we can actually spend more time providing quality feedback because we're not rushing to get through a whole cohort of 110 all to the same deadline. And then we don't actually release the feedback of the first early submitters until the flexible portal's closed, so that no one has an unfair advantage with knowing, oh, you know, they gave feedback on X, Y, and Z, and, you know, look out for this. And because we don't want anyone to be unfairly advantaged or disadvantaged depending on where they submit within the portal.
Right.
And-
Okay.
And just on that, I'll just quickly add a comment from many unit coordinators was the relief and astonishment that most didn't get any student requests for extensions because they were able to manage their environment, their home and study and work with that flexibility of maybe 1 or 2 days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. So it was really fantastic. They could actually see the benefit. Some were skeptical, going, oh, I don't know about this. But when they realised, like, why there's no student extensions coming in,
So that it reduces the administration of the extensions as well. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, because sometimes students only need 2 days or something.
Of course. Yeah.
And, you know, during COVID time, it was really unpredictable all over the place. And, you know, when your family gets sick, your child's sick, that obviously needs to take priority. So it's really sort of appreciating that life does get in the way and being flexible and not judgmental about that. And if you need 3 days, you've got those 3 days.
Thank you for answering that. I'm fascinated and excited about this.
But for everybody who would like to engage in more discussion about this, and even if you're thinking of embedding one or some or all, or trying to do all of these in your universities, please contact the team. Stuart has got our emails, and we would love to engage in a dialogue with you, and we can do some cross-institutional support, mentoring, and maybe even some research, because you can see that it works. We can see that it works. And yeah, our students have just as much life getting in the way as perhaps your students. So yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much.
much, Ingrid. And I think you are probably going to hear from a few people based on the enthusiasm that I'm detecting. So that's really all we've got time for today, folks. I'm really sorry if you didn't have your question answered. The team have done a really good job of answering those questions, so thank you. I'd just like to extend a huge thanks to you, to the CSSP team, Associate Professor Ingrid Harrington, Dr. Christy O'Neill, Dr. Kat Volpe-Johnson, and Associate Professor Rachel Adlington. You've done some fantastic work, and that was really a great presentation. I think everybody got a lot out of it. So huge thanks to you, and yeah, really appreciate your time. And we might get you back in a couple of years and see how you're traveling, and I'm sure you've will have improved the student experience a lot more by then. So thank you so much for being involved, and thanks for everybody for being there. I'll send out a recording of the session later today, and I'll include the chat log so you can see the questions and the responses to the questions. And it'll be very easy to find our colleagues at UNE if you want to ask them questions. And thank you all for being there, folks, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you,
See you next
Stuart, for
time.
having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.